My name is Leona Mercer, 37, Senior Contract Specialist at Horizon Tech Systems, the kind of person people forget until something catches fire. I'm not flashy, not loud. My job is to make sure no one's signature ruins the company. After years of fixing other people's mistakes, I've learned to stay calm while others panic. But that morning in Paris, even my pulse betrayed me. The conference room shimmered with white light, glass walls overlooking the Seine. The air smelled faintly of espresso and nerves. Across from me sat the executives of Virelin Energies, a French renewable energy consortium. On the screen before us, the number glowed like a heartbeat: $45,000. If we didn't finalize by 5 p.m., their board would shift the contract to our competitor in Zurich. 7 minutes left, then my phone vibrated. The caller ID, Kara Hinton, my manager in Boston. I hesitated, knowing what that tone meant before I heard it. Leona. "Where the hell are you?" she shouted, voice distorted through the speaker. "The department meeting started 15 minutes ago. Do you even take this job seriously?" The French legal director frowned. Someone's pen rolled off the table. My throat tightened. "I'm in Paris," I said evenly. "We're finalizing the Virelin contract. I don't care if you're on the moon. You were supposed to present the Q2 compliance report." I could feel every pair of eyes on me: European investors, translators, assistants watching the quiet American woman get scolded like a child. The clock on the wall blinked 6:53. The door opened. Raymond Cole, our CFO, stepped in. He didn't rush. He never did. Tall, silver hair, sleeves rolled to the wrist, the kind of presence that reset a room. He caught a fragment of Kara's voice, crossed the floor, and pressed the speaker button. "This is Raymond Cole," he said. His tone was even, but the air chilled. "End the call. Right now." The line went dead. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. Cole nodded once at me. "Let's close it. Leona." My hands steadied on the pen. Paris waited. Before Paris. My days followed a rhythm that no one else seemed to hear. I arrived at the Boston office before sunrise, when the only sound in the corridor was the hum of the vending machine and the soft echo of my heels on tile. My cubicle sat at the end of the hallway, facing a brick wall the color of dried blood, no window, no light. It was the company's quiet corner, a fitting spot for someone they forgot to invite to birthdays, but always copied on crisis emails. I was Horizon Tech's invisible insurance policy. My title, Senior Contract Specialist, sounded clinical, but what it meant was simple when someone at the top promised too much. I made sure it wouldn't bankrupt us. I redlined vendor agreements at midnight, flagged legal risks before they reached courtrooms, and turned sloppy drafts into binding, defensible contracts. Kara Hinton, my manager, called me her detail support. She liked to toss that phrase around in meetings, as if I were a plug-in she could toggle on or off. When a deal closed, she'd grin at the executives and say, "Our team pulled it off." Even though I'd spent 40 hours fixing what her team broke, it never used to bother me. Recognition meant exposure, and exposure in corporate life was a blade. I told myself that staying small was safer. That power only made you visible enough to be blamed. So I stayed in my corner, watching promotions pass like passing weather. Still, I kept count: 12 lawsuits avoided, 7 contract breaches prevented, 4 investigations closed quietly because of my revisions. My folder of ghost saves, I called it competence, I learned, was its own kind of rebellion. It couldn't be seen, but it couldn't be erased either. Every time Kara basked under fluorescent applause, a quiet line formed in my mind, a record of what I'd done, what they'd forgotten, and what they would one day remember. Paris hadn't made me visible yet, but something had shifted a current under the surface, moving faster than anyone realized. 2 weeks before that call from Paris, I'd been packing for something else entirely: 5 quiet days in Maine. My first vacation in 3 years. I'd rented a cabin by the ocean, bought a second-hand novel, even promised myself not to check email. I lasted exactly 14 hours before Raymond Cole appeared at the door of my cubicle. "Mercer," he said, Voice clipped, but not unkind. How do you feel about Paris? I turned, startled. For vacation? He smiled faintly. For survival. Cole didn't waste words. The company had spent 2 years courting Virelin Energies, a European renewable energy consortium. The deal worth $45 million had reached its final stage. The problem, their legal team demanded a new liability clause that didn't exist under U.S. regulation. The in-house lawyers were panicking. Kara had prior engagements. You're the only one who can translate both systems fast enough, Cole said. You leave Wednesday, 48 hours to close. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him I'd earned the right to disappear for a week, but behind him, through the glass partition, I saw the floor plan taped to the HR board, a chart of projected layoffs if the contract collapsed. Rows of names in small black font. Some I knew. Some had asked me for help months ago. I nodded. I'll go. That night I unpacked the swimsuit, folded it back into the drawer, and printed every version of the Virelin draft. 93 pages, 7 annexes. I highlighted each conflict line until my fingers were fluorescent yellow. The flight left Logan Airport at 9:40 p.m. I worked through dinner, through the Atlantic night, under the small cone of light above seat 14A. The plane shuddered, a coffee cup tipped. My pen didn't stop moving. I read every clause aloud in a whisper until the words blurred into rhythm indemnity. Jurisdiction, force majeure, somewhere over Iceland. I closed the final page and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The face looking back wasn't tired, it was carved with intent. Perfection had always been my armor. But this time, it was also my ticket to war. Paris smelled like rain and printer ink that morning. The glass conference room on the 30th floor overlooked the city, a panorama of slate rooftops under pale light. I sat across from the Virelin legal team, 4 people in immaculate suits, their accents soft, but their words sharp as contracts. The clock read 9:13 a.m. The meeting had started at 8, and already the air felt thinner. We'd been circling one sentence for over an hour, the liability cap. Virelin wanted a limit equal to the total value of the contract, $45 million. I'd offered 20%, the industry standard. Neither side moved. Madame Mercer, said their lead counsel, Etienne Duval, his tone polite but surgical. You expect us to invest without assurance of full restitution. That is ambitious. I smiled, though my pulse jumped. What we offer is proportional protection. Assurance without self-destruction. Behind me, our translator whispered the exchange to Cole and the finance officer joining remotely from Boston. We were holding the line, but just barely. Then my phone lit up. Kara Hinton. First a text, "Where are you?" Another followed, "The compliance meeting started 10 minutes ago. You were on the agenda." I ignored it, but the third buzz came seconds later. Incoming call. Kara Hinton. Etienne was waiting for my counteroffer. My throat felt dry. I muttered, "Excuse me," and stepped into the mirrored hallway. The city spread below like a field of glass. Kara, I said quietly, I'm in the middle of the Paris negotiation. The what her voice was a blade. Don't make excuses. Leona, you've already embarrassed the department once this quarter. We're finalizing the liability clause. If we don't close today, the contract moves to Zurich. She laughed, sharp and disbelieving. Sure it does. Come back and do your real job. Through the wall. I could see Etienne checking his watch. Every second I spent defending myself was $1 slipping away. Kara, I'll call you back, I said, ending the line before she could answer. I turned toward the room, straightened my jacket, and walked back in. The air was colder. The clock read 9:27. The deal was still alive barely. Etienne's assistant was reprinting the revised liability clause when my phone lit up again. The same name. Kara Hinton. This time she didn't text, she went straight for the call, her voice flooding the speaker before I could greet her. Leona, what are you doing? She demanded. You're missing the meeting again. The CFO is asking for an update and you're nowhere to be found. For a second, I thought she was joking. Then I realized she truly had no idea. "I'm with Virelin Energies," I said, forcing my tone steady. "We're finalizing the $45 million contract. It's happening now." "Oh, please," she snapped. "Stop pretending your clerical tasks are negotiations. You're embarrassing yourself." The door opened. Raymond Cole stepped inside. The sound of Kara's voice filled the room, loud enough for everyone to hear. Etienne's brow arched. His team exchanged glances. Cole didn't look at me. He went straight to the table, resting both hands on the edge. "Who is that?" Etienne asked in a low voice. "Our Boston manager," I said, quietly mortified. Cole's expression didn't shift. He pressed the speaker button. "Ms. Hinton, this is Raymond Cole." The room stilled. Even Kara's voice faltered. "I'm here with Leona Mercer," he continued. "She's representing Horizon Tech at the Virelon negotiation. End the call. Right now." There was a beat of stunned silence, then a faint click as the line went dead. Cole looked at Etienne. "Shall we proceed?" The Frenchman smiled slightly, impressed. "Bien sûr." From that moment, the tone of the meeting changed, the tension thinned, replaced by respect so palpable it felt like air returning to lungs. I adjusted my papers, my hands suddenly steady. By 4:57 p.m., both sides had signed. The ink shimmered under the overhead light proof of weeks, months, years of work finally given form. As the last signature dried, Cole turned to me. "You handled this well." "Mercer." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. For the first time in my career, I wasn't the invisible one cleaning up the mess. I was the reason the lights would stay on. At 30,000 feet, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft gold glow. The hum of the engines was steady, almost meditative. I leaned back against the seat and opened my laptop. The contract glowed on the screen, a single PDF stamped with every signature, every page initialed, every clause aligned like gears in a perfect machine. For the first time in days, I exhaled. The file name read Virelon Chaco Final Executed PDF. I stared at it longer than I needed to, as if the document itself could steady the rush inside me. The deal was done. 45 million secured. My inbox had exploded. Subject lines from Boston stacked one after another. "Congratulations, great work, amazing team effort." There were emojis, exclamation marks, even a few from people who hadn't spoken to me in months. Then I saw it one message tucked neatly between the noise. "From HR policy compliance, subject clarification required regarding recent absence." I opened it. "Dear Ms. Mercer, we've received questions regarding your unapproved absence from mandatory departmental meetings during the week of the Virelon engagement. Please provide documentation confirming authorization and coverage of essential duties. Best, Human Resources." Below the signature line, my eyes caught a small detail. "CC Kara Hinton." The hum of the aircraft shifted, subtle but sharp enough to catch in my chest. I recognized that phrasing. The gentle phrasing of accusation disguised as process. It wasn't the first time I'd seen a blade hidden in an email. I closed the laptop slowly, watching the reflection of the overhead light fade from the screen. Outside the window, the Atlantic spread like liquid glass beneath the clouds. Somewhere below, Boston waited its skyline flickering faintly through the haze. I thought of the cubicle facing the brick wall, the years of silence, the unspoken rule that competence was safest when unseen. I'd stepped into the light once, and already it burned. The captain's voice came through the speakers. "Calm and distant, ladies and gentlemen. We've begun our descent into Boston." I straightened my jacket. The celebration was over. The next storm had already begun. The email arrived at 7:42 a.m. sharp. Subject: formal review attendance policy violation. The meeting was set for 9. No context, no greeting. Just a time, a room number, and the unspoken promise of humiliation. The HR conference room was all glass transparent enough for everyone in the corridor to watch, but soundproof enough to pretend it was private. Kara was already inside when I arrived, sitting beside a young HR associate with a neat stack of printed documents. She didn't stand when I entered. "Leona," she said with that polished sweetness that only ever preceded a strike. "Please have a seat." The HR associate adjusted her glasses and began reading. "This review concerns your failure to attend 2 mandatory departmental meetings on the week of March 10th. Such absences fall under Category B infractions unless prior authorization has been granted." Kara leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, the ghost of a smile tugging her lips. I waited until the reading stopped, then opened my laptop. "Authorization was granted," I said calmly, "by Mr. Cole. You were copied." I turned the screen toward them emails, signed travel approval forms. Even the itinerary from corporate travel showing the Paris flight booked under executive code clearance. Kara didn't look. "Our system doesn't reflect that." She replied, "Then your system is wrong." I said, meeting her eyes. Halfway through her next sentence, the door opened. Raymond Cole stepped in without announcement. The room straightened around him. He stood behind me, silent, arms folded, as the HR associate stumbled over her words. When she finished reading the final paragraph of the report, Cole spoke for the first time. "Did she close the Paris deal?" No one answered. The hum of the building's ventilation filled the silence. "Finally," Kara muttered. "She did." Cole nodded once. "Then this meeting is over." He turned and left without another word. The HR associate blinked, uncertain whether to stand or apologize. I closed my laptop, the click echoing louder than any applause could have. Outside the glass walls, people pretended not to look, but they saw everything. The office was nearly empty when the cleaning crew arrived, their carts whispering down the corridor. I stayed behind. Lights dimmed. The glow of my monitor the only illumination left. Outside the window, Boston was soaked in drizzle, the harbor lights fractured and trembling on the glass. On my desk lay a small mountain of manila folders, each one marked with a year 2018, 2019, 2020. 6 years of warnings no one had ever wanted to read. I opened them one by one: compliance memos, audit summaries, risk notes that had been postponed for review. I could still hear the polite replies in my head. "We'll circle back. Leona, let's not complicate this quarter." Each document told the same story. In quiet, sterile language, inflated sales reports, misclassified contractors, missing safety audits, tax exposures neatly ignored to hit quarterly targets. I hadn't written accusations. I'd written lifelines. They'd just let them sink. The HR scare that morning had shifted something I couldn't shift back. For years, I'd fought to protect the company. Tonight, I began protecting myself. I opened a new document and typed a title across the top: Internal Risk Assessment Confidential. The first line came easily. This report compiles 6 years of documented noncompliance across multiple departments within Horizon Tech Systems. I wrote until midnight, each paragraph sharper than the last. I cross-referenced attachments, listed regulation codes, quoted the emails they'd ignored every "thank you for your diligence" that really meant "please disappear." When I was done, I added a final exhibit: the Paris contract, proof that integrity could save millions and that the people who tried to destroy me had no idea what I'd just secured for them. The document printed out to 73 pages. I didn't plan to send it, not yet. I simply saved it twice, uploaded it to my private drive, and closed the lid of my laptop. For the first time in years, I left the office without turning off the light. 48 hours after I hit send, the building changed. Conversations dropped when I passed. Doors stayed half closed. By Monday morning, the legal department was already holding emergency briefings. Someone from the Department of Labor had called, asking for clarification on internal reporting discrepancies. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew the files were out. Raymond Cole moved quickly. He didn't summon me or ask questions. Instead, he announced an internal performance audit, phrased so gently it almost sounded routine. But by noon, Every department head had been told to turn over their quarterly data. The walls of Horizon Tech finally began to creak. I kept my head down, pretending to review vendor agreements while HR combed through attendance records. Kara's voice echoed down the hall all afternoon, sharp, defensive, desperate. The following morning, her office blinds were closed, and by 5 o'clock, her nameplate was gone. The official email arrived 10 minutes later, effective immediately. Kara Hinton has resigned to pursue other opportunities. The internal memo that followed was longer, colder, and eerily familiar. It laid out new standards for compliance and ethics, almost word for word from a policy I had drafted 3 years earlier, the one Kara had once dismissed as too cautious for growth. There was no credit line, no mention of authorship, just policy, stripped of a name but heavy with recognition. Cole stopped by my cubicle that evening. He didn't smile, just placed a folded note on my desk. Audit complete. Well handled. That was all. Outside, the city was a blur of headlights and drizzle. I walked home through the wet air, feeling something like relief, though it wasn't triumph. It was quieter, steadier like gravity resetting itself. That night, I left my phone on the counter, unplugged my laptop, and drew the curtains. For the first time in years, I didn't dream about deadlines or signatures. Boston hummed faintly beyond the glass, and for once, it sounded less like a machine and more like breathing. Spring returned to Boston quietly that year, the city thawed in slow motion, ice retreating from the harbor, sunlight flashing off the glass towers, the faint scent of salt threading through the air. My new office overlooked it all, a corner space of calm blue and glass where the morning light reached the walls before I did. The brass plate on the door read, Director of Global Compliance. Some days, I still caught myself tracing the letters, half expecting them to fade back into the cubicle wall I'd stared at for years. But they didn't. The view had changed. The work hadn't. The first weeks were relentless new regulations, new markets, a global team spread across time zones. I built systems that actually worked, trained analysts who asked questions instead of hiding mistakes, and rewrote every policy Kara had twisted into fear. The company's reputation, once whispered about in legal circles, began to recover. Our name showed up again in industry briefings, this time with words like integrity beside it. One morning, Raymond Cole stopped by without warning. He placed a cup of coffee on my desk, the same brand he'd brought to every late-night meeting. "You've rebuilt our credibility," he said, looking out at the water. "Don't lose what made you different." He didn't stay long. He never did. But when the door clicked shut behind him, the room felt full. I turned my chair toward the harbor, watching sunlight tremble on the waves. Somewhere below, ferries were cutting their white trails through the water, steady and deliberate. My phone buzzed on the desk. Another meeting request. Another crisis waiting to be managed. I stared at the screen for a beat, then hit decline. The echo from Paris returned to me, his voice over the speakerphone. Calm and absolute. End the call. Right now. This time, it wasn't his voice I heard. It was mine.